This is a 2017 STI, and it's a pretty basic bolt-on car. We have a COBB SF intake. We have an HKS blow-off valve, which I don't recommend, and I'll go into that in a minute. Turbo Smart fuel pressure regulator, PRE damper mod. This has an aftermarket fuel pressure sensor that goes to the just a gauge. Some more sensor stuff that goes to gauges it's not being used. Down here we have ID 1050 injectors. It has a turbo back exhaust, which includes a high flow catted NVIDIA downpipe. It's a stock turbo, which is a VF, I think, 48 on this car. And yeah, other than that, it's pretty basic. But there is no off-the-shelf map for this car. There was for a while, but even it had some limitations, and I wouldn't have really recommended using it. And we'll go into why here in just a moment. Two more quick parts to note. It has a COBB 3-port electronic boost control solenoid, and then back in the fuel tank there is a Beechworks 65C fuel pump. The car is strapped down to the dyno, and we also have a boost pickup that goes to the dyno, as well as back in the back we have a wideband air fuel, which actually comes back. The sensor is here, and it basically has a little venturi that sniffers out some of the exhaust gas and then runs it to the sensor. And that's how we're going to measure the air fuel ratio on the car while we're on the dyno, and measure the boost for the dyno just as a reference. It's not super important that I have a boost pickup, because I have boost reference in the ECU that it's going to see all the time. One thing I'd definitely like to note, that where this Accessport is located, I'm not going to really be able to get my cords plugged into it, being that I don't have a right angle one, and even if I did, I don't really like it up here while I'm tuning. So we're going to go ahead and detach it if we can. And I actually brought, because it's always a good idea to have this, my own COBB cable, so I can put the Accessport wherever I want in the car, and I'm not tethered to having it up in the corner where the customer has it. So first thing we need to do is select the vehicle that we'll be tuning. And I don't really know if this is a how to tune a car video. We're going to use CCF3. Even though we're not using any of the CCF3 features, which is the COBB nexgen, flex fuel, and whatnot, I'm going to tune this in that mode. That way in the future, if the customer wants any of those features, we can just add them right into the tune file. I am on a beta version for a bug fix that we're testing. And that's one of the great things about COBB, is that if you have a bug, they're going to do whatever they can to address that bug and fix it. And the bug was actually not something very major. It was a weird logging glitch, and I think we fixed it with this mod. So far I haven't had the glitch happen since I've been on this beta. I've only got about 5 more days before this beta deactivates itself, and in that time I'm just going to keep using it until it either has the issue or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, I just let them know, hey, the issue's fixed, and if it does, then we can troubleshoot from there. You're not going to find that in a lot of other software companies where they work directly with their tuners to effectively, like, working with their tuners to make sure that the software and everything is working correctly. So we want to use a new calibration. I don't want to start with any other customer's calibration. So we're on the 2017 STI CCF Gen 3 stock. This is the stock file. There's a couple things that aren't stock about it that just default in these calibrations to being changed from a stock image, but for the most part it's stock. Next thing we're going to do, we open the Accessport manager, and we're just going to make sure that this Accessport is all up to date. It saves the factory ECU data to my computer in case we need to do something. So we are not on the newest firmware, especially if we're using CCF3. We want to be on the newest firmware. So I'm not going to make you watch me update it, but it is very important to update your firmware. Again, don't listen to the internet that tells you not to update your firmware. This is definitely a mandatory step. All right, AP is up to date, and you can see it is installed on the vehicle. It is installed on the Stage 1 plus SF, which is probably the closest map to what needs to be on this car. I'm going to go ahead and copy the serial number off of here so that I can save that on the map that I'm about to create. We could start with that Stage 1 plus SF map if we'd like, which actually we'll go ahead and do that. So I'm going to load that Stage 1 plus SF, and then I'm going to begin tuning. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and copy all of these maps over to just into the folder that I'm using. Alright, so it's Wheel Tune for Taco demo. And we'll go ahead and open that Stage 1 map. So Stage 1 SF, we'll just do boost select. That'll be fine. Version 401. That'll work great. Oh, actually I can't. Looks like I have to upgrade. Oh, so yeah, we're going to upgrade. So it'll be in the CCF3. It's got older stuff, blah, 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 defaulted, turned off. Anyway, close. So we are still in CCF Gen 3. And what we need to do is start the tune here. Now this car, like I said, had ID 1050 injectors. So we're going to want to scale those injectors first. Here we have injector scale. So there's a bunch of different things in here. But what's really important is that you have good injector data. So here is the ID 1050 characterization data. And this comes directly from Injector Dynamics, and it's one of the reasons why every tuner loves Injector Dynamics, because they give you this data. And some of this data is not particularly friendly, I should say. So like the fuel injector scale is not like how many cc's is it. It's actually a measure of time for a specific fuel quantity. And so the smaller this number, the larger the injector, because a bigger injector takes less time to spray out a certain quantity. So when we come back over to our tune file, we can start with our latency. Let's just do that. So latency is the time that it takes the injector to open. So if we look at this, we have injector latency right here. And you can see the voltage scale is 8 to 16, and then there's some milliseconds. So I'm going to copy these. And this is pretty straightforward, and you can build yourself base maps based on this information. And then you don't have to necessarily populate this all the time, but you know, starting from scratch is always a good way to check your work. So these are the same bits of data that are in this table here. So I'm going to go ahead and populate the rest of this information in. We have fuel injector small pulse width. Again, we have to copy that. If we come over here, here's our small pulse width. And these are factory values, and we'll get some of the Injector Dynamics values in there. Now, fun thing, you can see at low pulse widths, these injectors actually, you're going to compensate with a negative number, meaning at low pulse width, the injector is trying to spray too much. So we want it to compensate the other direction. Maximum, that table went to 3. RPM, we'll just max this out. 12,800 is the max number there. The injector scale is 2764. Yep, 2764. Just double checking that. I've done this so many times that I remember these off the top of my head. Pulse width minimum is 0.309, and that's also the same as the bottom number in this injector pulse width table. Now the fuel economy display factor correction is for the display up there, but there's another way that we're going to do this in COBB, and that is through the COBB custom features. And oops, not that one, sorry. Fuel injectors, where is it at? Fuel economy display, there we go. And this is an automatic rescaler for it. Otherwise, you can do the manual rescaling. Now, if you don't rescale this, what happens is, and you may have seen this on the forums where somebody is like, hey, I got my car tuned and now I'm getting 50 miles per gallon or 38 miles per gallon. Well, they're not. What happened is they didn't rescale this factor. So this we don't have to worry about, which is the one that's in the injector table, because we're using the automatic scaler. Now trim. We have aftermarket injectors. This is a trim table for stock injectors to trim per cylinder here. But we don't need to trim per cylinder because we don't necessarily know what our actual trims are. Now if I had a sheet that had each injector on the sheet characterized at various different pulse widths, that's what's across the top there is pulse width, I could say, like if injector 3, everything below 5 pulse widths or 5 milliseconds pulse width is 4% more than the other injectors, I could scale that in and have a better, more complete tune. I don't have that information because it wasn't given to me, so we can't do anything with that. So that's the injector scaling. Now it'd be nice if it was that simple, if that was all of the things that had to change based on injector size difference. And that's all the data that's given here. And now here's where things get fun. Oh, this is another kind of fun thing. ID gives these tables based on 43.5 psi base fuel pressure and 10% ethanol. But if you want, you can change that ethanol content, and now you'll see my injector scaler is now 3839 instead of 2764. So it's kind of fun. And same thing with this, you can change my base pressure to 58, and now I have an updated fuel scale and updated injector latency. So good things to know. All right, back to here. So pretty much everything under fuel tables has something that's going to have to be changed in order for us to scale this correctly. Not necessarily in the learning and the closed loop, open loop targets that we're going to change in order to make optimal power. But everything else down here just about is going to have to change. So cranking fuel. Well, this is a base millisecond. So anything that is not a percentage but has a raw millisecond value, we can say this probably has to be changed. Now these are 1050 injectors. Actually, we'll do our old injectors. The old injectors are 565s, and these are 1050s. So we've got about 53%. You could definitely just copy that value into here and just do a multiplier for 53%. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do about 70. Oops, 0.7. I don't like taking quite that much fuel out. You definitely could, but I'm not going to. Now, there's a bunch of these cranking tables, A, B, C, D, E, and F, and all of them have to be changed. And this is where tuning can be very time consuming, and it's why people start with base maps. Alright, so I rescaled my fuel pump, rescaled my injectors. In the overrun, there's some initial enrichments, there's some post-start enrichment things that had to get rescaled, and tip-in enrichment stuff that had to get rescaled. The last thing I want to do with bigger injectors is I actually want to bump the idle up just a hair. And this was at 700 from the factory, so I'm just going to bump that up 100 RPMs, and that's just going to make the car run a little bit smoother. Huge injectors like these don't love to run at low pulse widths so well, so we're going to do that just to make it run a little bit better. So we're going to go ahead and save our file so we can get ready to flash it. I went ahead and just named this Will Tune for Tacos Demo Test 2017 STI. In the description, I put what we've got effectively going on: ID 1050X injectors, COBB SF intake, NVIDIA catted turboback, DW65C fuel pump, and COBB 3-port EBCS. One thing I just remembered, because I typed that description in, is we need to change some settings for the EBCS. So the fuel pump, we don't really have to change settings for, other than the fact that we installed those injectors, so we had to rescale the fuel pump for when it goes into low, medium, and high mode. The turboback, that's part of tuning. The intake is scaled in this tune file, and let me go ahead and save this, and then I'll show you where that is. So the intake itself has already been rescaled. This calibration is the known calibration from COBB. Scales up to 490 grams per second. Now, for the boost control solenoid, what we're going to do is we'll go to boost control tables, we'll go to wastegate duty. First thing is a frequency. I like to bump that up. 19. You can go up to 23. Sometimes that causes issues. And then we're just going to start our tuning at 0% wastegate duty cycle. And that's honestly the best way to do things. Now I make a couple other changes. I don't want to be pulling a bunch of duty cycle for barometric pressure changes. In fact, we'll probably be adding duty cycle. This means as you go up in elevation, the factory tune wants, and even the COBB Stage 1 tune wants you to run less duty cycle, which doesn't make any sense. Coolant temp that's already scaled, intake temp that's already scaled. These are pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and half that value though, which I do for a lot of stuff. Anyway, and then boost targets, we're going to leave this as the stock Stage 1 targets for now, and we'll probably raise these when we start tuning the car. First gear, I don't really want to compensate 15%. That's going to make it do 15% more boost target. In fact, we don't want more boost target at all. Wastegate target we can do, boost target no. Now this one, we're going to have a hard time making all the boost at lower barometric pressures, so we can do, actually we'll do -10. Anyway, these values are just stuff that we've determined over years of tuning these cars, what works and what doesn't. So this is a pretty good startup calibration. We're going to go ahead and save that, and then we're going to flash the vehicle. I have the Accessport plugged in. I have the cables all in the pass-through configuration. So we started it. We're going to turn the vehicle on, connect to the Accessport and flash, and that should give us our startup tune. Oh, we are unable to connect to Accessport. Got a disconnect from the AP manager. Can't be connected to two things at once. So let's try that again. Good stuff to know. Especially if it's your first time using Accesstuner. I think they discontinued Accesstuner Race, but at some point it will probably come back. And when it comes back, you know, watching these videos might help you out a little bit. And if you're another tuner and you just need some tips on how to get started, yeah. All right, we're done flashing. Turn the ignition off. Hit OK. Takes just a second. Ignition on. Hit OK. It has to reset the learned parameters on the ECU, and then turn off again. Wait 15 seconds. In that 15 seconds, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my gauges are set up on here. Make sure that the last thing I was tuning wasn't speed density, because if it was, I might not have MAF voltage. How's airflow? Yep, MAF voltage. All right, so there we go. And I don't really need manifold absolute pressure. We'll save the logger. So you can log all kinds of stuff, but the more stuff you log, the slower the data logger is. So it's not always a good idea to just log everything. But this is the logging list that I like. So we're going to go ahead and key on. And now we're going to connect to the ECU. And now we're going to open the dashboard, and you can see that it seems to be working. So we have throttle position, requested torque changes when I floor it. Battery voltage is kind of low, but it'll be fine. So we're going to start it up and see what happens. Fired right up. That's a good sign. No abnormal roughness or anything when I first started it. In fact, you can see no knock sums, but the more important is roughness counts. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, no roughness counts on first startup with new injectors, which is pretty good. We are pulling some fuel, and we'll have to look into why. Now this car does have an aftermarket fuel pressure regulator, and there's a decent chance that the fuel pressure is set too high. So let's go take a look at that. I forgot, we don't have a gauge on this one, but we do have a gauge in the car, because, you know, sometimes I'm an idiot. So what we have here, fuel pressure, looks like we're clear up above 40. Now, right now, we have vacuum being applied, and we have about 9.7 psi being removed. So if we take 43.5 and we subtract 9.7, we'd get 33.8 is what our target is. So we're going to go back out here and we're going to lower the pressure until we get down to around 33 psi. Pressure regulator is pretty simple to adjust. Jam that, loosen that a little bit, and back this off. 4 mil on this turbo front one. Start with a half turn to see where we ended up on pressure. That's pretty close. I'm actually going to go up like an eighth of a turn, so that's like 31. Now, the fuel pump might not be at 100% anymore, so we might have to raise it just a little bit, so we'll do that, and then we'll just start tuning. Super important, tighten back down that jam now so it doesn't back itself off. And you don't need to have that super tight just a little bit. You see how it like backed it actually went up just a little bit and I tightened it down. So that'll be fine. We'll just tune from there. So fun thing you can see, our air fuel correction is now negative 2.34%. By having changed that fuel pressure, we're almost perfectly dialed on fuel trim. And this is just a base map. This is just a startup map. We're just using the correct data and inputting it into the ECU. So really, like if you were to buy a base map from me, this is what we'd be doing. Usually on a base map like that, I also put a lower rev limiter in just to keep you from accidentally blowing it up if there is a problem or something installed incorrectly or whatnot. But this is, for all intents and purposes, what a base map looks like. It's also what we do our first little bit of driving on the dyno with. So we're going to go ahead and drive a little bit. See what's happening. Pulling a little fuel at a specific spot, and I'm going to show you why in a second. Look at all that fuel it's pulling. 12, 13, 15, 17%, 26%. Alright. What is that? Why is it pulling fuel there? This is actually the opposite of the stumble issue that everybody talks about. And the reason it's there is because of this table here. Hey look, right where we just were, 2,700 RPMs, this is a load compensation where it's percentagely increasing calculated load right where we were just driving. So let me pull back up that log. Check in the live trace, see that live trace. Alright, so the numbers almost match. Pretty crazy. Now we're not more much. Let's go back, let's see if we can get back down on the RPM a little bit. Come back through that zone. Pulling 10%, pulling 12, 13%, 14%. You can see what it's doing. You can see how it follows and it traces this cable. Well, because of the fuel system mods that we've done with the regulator and everything else, this table is effectively obsolete. So we can just go ahead and zero, there's actually a twin table to it. We can just go ahead and zero those tables out. And that's going to, we'll have to reflash the car, but that should stop that behavior. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the brake on the dyno here. We're going to save this map. And this is a perfect example of our stumble fix doing what it's supposed to do and actually fixing what causes that stumble. Alright, got that change flashed. Now let's drive it up to some speed. We're probably going to see positive corrections. We are still seeing some small corrections, but not like we were. Much better corrections. 2,500. Those issues with the factory fuel pressure calibration, how they tried to band-aid the problem. Since we fixed the problem on the car, we don't need to band-aid it. So let's go ahead and do a poll. I don't know how far we'll do this poll to, but yeah. The results of our first pull. I let off at, oops, I have that on speed. Hold on. Hold the phone. Hold the phone. Alright, I let off at about 5,700 RPMs. And we were making a whopping 258 horse and 238 torque, but that's because we're at very low boost. Only about 10 pounds, and then it starts to creep, which is what happens on these setups. They do creep. So we crept up to 14.31 before I let off. The AFR is down to the low 11s, little bit leaner than I like, so I'm not going to change that in the tune. I'm just going to go turn up that fuel pressure just about an eighth of a turn, and should get us right where we want to be. So we see we're at close to a storage ratio, and then we start to enrich. At low boost, we're enriched in the mid-12s, which is fine. And then as the boost starts to come up and the RPM comes up, we start enriching down into the mid to low 11s. By the time we start coming up in boost, we're at lower 11s. So I want to be a little bit lower in the 11s, especially because our target air fuel is supposed to be at least up higher. Looks like we're actually pretty close to target. So command fuel final 11.3 and our measured fuel final 11.2, 11.3. So I actually just need to go in. I forgot how much I hate these off-the-shelf maps. And the COBB OTS map, they're open to fuel, yeah. So the car's basically running right down in this area, and that's just legal than we want. But we're going to be giving it more boost, and we're going to get out here. We just want to make sure that where we're going to be at, we have AFRs that are a little bit more appropriate to making power and keeping these engines together. So we're going to go ahead and fix this. And this isn't the process that I'm going to be showing in this video. This video was more just to kind of get you guys in on how to start building a map. And then from here, you're going to start actually tuning the map and trying to get the car to do what we want it to do. So finished the tune and car runs good, but I had mentioned earlier about this HKS blow-off valve, and everyone asks me, hey, do you need a tune for a blow-off valve? And the answer is there isn't a tune for a blow-off valve unless you convert the car to speed density, which we didn't do. But as you can see, my fuel trims are pretty dialed, everything's normal, but what happens when I make this blow-off valve go off? So now you see the AFR is reading super lean, which is fine, and then nothing. So because this valve is actually closing when it's supposed to, it's working just fine. And I don't know when HKS changed things, but at some point they put a stiffer spring inside their genuine blow-off valves, and that stiffer spring lets the valve shut quickly like it's supposed to, and so it works okay on top mount type cars. Now if you switch it to a front mount, you may need a stiffer spring still inside the gate or inside the valve, but realistically, if you're running a front mount, I would recommend just going to speed density. So yeah, do you need a tune for your blow-off valve? Not necessarily. Well, no, you don't. You either need the right valve that works right, or you need to switch to speed density.